80 people. I guess we have enough number of participants to get started. All right, so let's talk about federated learning. So welcome to AI week 14 of AI612. So let me make it into the full screen. So yeah, the theme of today is federated learning, but actually we're going to talk about two stuff. Oh, so recap, we talked about synthetic data last week. So talked about synthetic data in general, and then synthetic EHR in particular with the algorithm of Medgan. And then we looked at the quantitative and both quantitative and qualitative evaluation of it. And then we spent some time on privacy attacks, especially two examples, which were membership inference and attribute disclosure. And we at the end of the class last week, I said that I wanted to talk about differential privacy a little bit. So that's what we're going to do today. So we're going to talk about two things: differential privacy and federated learning. And I'm not sure if we have enough time to talk about federated learning, but because we're going to spend some time on differential privacy first, and that's quite there's quite a bit of things to talk about. So if we run out of time, maybe this Thursday we can talk about federated learning first a little bit, and then talk about the project specs. So let's get started. So differential privacy. So so we talked about privacy attacks last week, and in particular, two particular examples. But in general, those were particular examples. So in general, we would like to talk about the how to define privacy first. So because there could be many other forms of attacks, like besides membership inference and attribute disclosure. So in general, we'd like to formulate what privacy risk is mathematically, and then talk about how to evaluate privacy risk quantitatively, and then how to prevent it. So that's what we're going to do today. So differential privacy provides a quantitative framework to evaluate privacy risk mathematically or statistically, actually. So privacy risk in analytics. So we're not going to just talk about generative models or machine learning or like GANs or how generative models can risk privacy. We're going to talk about privacy risk in general. So we'll start with privacy risks in analytics. So if there's data and you have a analyst or researcher studying something on the data, and there could be potentially privacy risk by doing a research or analysis. So we're going to talk about that first. So suppose that though you have a hospital visit record, and then you, as an analyst, you ask two questions, which is first, how many hospital visits were made last year in total? So like how many by all patients, how many hospital visits were made last year? So that reflects a trend. So it's not, there's nothing personal about it. It's just like a macro level trend. But if you ask questions such as how many times John visited hospital last year, then that reflects an individual. So that is targeted. The second question is targeted for a specific person. So that is risking privacy issue. So the first question is probably okay because we have to do some study on the data. So in order to develop a drug or come up with a new policy or assign a new budget, whatever. So in order to take on action, we need to read a trend. So that much is necessary. But do we really need information about a specific individual? So that probably is not. So while we want to do this, we don't want to do this. All right, I'm gonna mute everybody. Okay, so as I said, so we want to do this while we want to avoid doing this. So that's the kind of like the motivation. So there are privacy risks such as privacy risk is something that cannot be avoided by using access control Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, access control policy. So it's not like, so for example, if you give someone a full access to the data, someone you can trust, and you can, and then you have some limited access to the data for someone who you cannot trust, and then hopefully you're, protecting privacy, but that is not the case, because uh, privacy risk is something that cannot be avoided by X control policy. So because there can be both internal risk and external risks, and both cannot be avoided perfectly. So internal risk is obviously some internal analysts have access to the original. So something that can be done as an inside job. So as a company, you might be constructing a lot of, like, a large scale data that might potentially be harmful for protecting privacy of an individual, like clients. So for example, these are some famous privacy risk examples. So such as, UC Irvine medical center, UC Irvine Medical Center, like those. So there was about there was a potential breach of nearly 5,000 patient because of the internal access to the patient records. Same thing goes for Sutter Health, which is actually which is an organization that I did my internship at. So Sutter Health, California Pacific Medical Center audit. So internal audit uncovered some data breach. So again, uh, analysts employed by Sutter Health had unnecessary access to too much data, basically. So that was uncovered by an internal audit. And Morgan Stanley breach also was something of an inside job. So understanding the nature of insider threats. So there's always a threat that someone in your organization or in your company might have access to too much private data, and that could lead to privacy risk. So that's internal risk. External risk also exists. So simply releasing de-identified data is not enough, because there's always a potential probability that someone else out there in the world with your release de-identified data, they can link your data with some external data and then try to uncover or identify individuals. So de-identified data can still be exploited to learn private info. So a very famous example is a Netflix prize data set. So what happened some time ago, maybe 10 or 15 years ago, what Netflix did is they released de-identified movie ratings data of about some million number of account users. So some million number of Netflix users. So they anonymized all the private information, their age, their sex, their location, whatever. They just anonymize all of them, and then simply just released movie ratings. So like so each row represents a single an individual, a Netflix user, and then each column represents each movie, and then the rating is like, from 1 star to 5 stars. So it's a tabular data, and the prize was that there's a competition. So if a competition participant could accurately predict the movie ratings of a hidden individual at test time, then they get the prize. So that was the whole setup. And then some researchers at Cornell, so what they did is they used external data to link so basically they use IMDb. IMDb is Internet Movie Database. So it's like a, what is it? It's like Watcha or Naver movie, something like that. So they use the IMDb database to link the records of IMDb data to the Netflix anonymized data, and then they were able to reconstruct very accurately who each ratings were, who the ratings were made by. So because they have IMDb account, user account information. So IMDb user account has like, like a username something, like username whatever, reviewed some movies or assigned a score for some movies. So basically IMDb also contains some movie ratings data along with usernames. So using that information, they linked those information to Netflix price data, and then they were able to re-identify which IMDb username made such rating in the Netflix price data set. So that was a pretty big issue. And then after releasing this information about how to break anonymity of the Netflix price data set, so Netflix just canceled the Netflix price data set, and then they actually shut down the whole data set release. So there's not just internal risk, but there's also external risk. So simply believing that as a company, you could release a de-identified data set, but that is not enough, because in the future, someone else might come along and try to re-identify re-identify the individuals by using some external data set somewhere out there in the world. So there's always potential external risk in the future. So we need to do better than just the identification. So quoting Cynthia Dwork, who is the researcher that designed differential privacy in the beginning, back in 2000. What time? I forgot which time. I think it was 2008 or 2007. So quoting Cynthia Dwork, she said that the de-identified data isn't. So de-identified data isn't. It means that she meant that de-identified data is neither de-identified, because there's always a potential risk of re-identification, and it is not a data, because it is de-identified. So the statistics are hidden, and it's not the intact data. So that's why she came up with the differential privacy, obviously. So yeah, de-identification or anonymization cannot protect future risks, because a data set might be released in the future. Someone else might come along. If you as a company release data set, and then in the future someone else, some other organization might release some other data set that seemingly has nothing to do with your data set, but there might be some researcher that could link those data set together to re-identify, just like the Netflix price data set. Similar thing actually happened with the New York taxi data set. So New York taxi data set is, the taxi company in New York released a data set which contained anonymized information about some random person taking a cab from position A to position B, and you don't know which person took the ride, but someone else came along with internet photos of celebrities taking a taxi, and then they were able to re-identify which taxi cab ride was made by which celebrity. And actually they were able to identify a specific individual. I think it was at the time some politician or mayor of New York City, or some politician of New York City or something. So yeah, they were able to tell that this person made a taxi ride from position A to position B at some time in the past, something like that. So as again, just like the Netflix price data set example, there's always a potential risk. So enter differential privacy. So differential privacy provide a framework to statistically quantify privacy. So it's you can measure the privacy risk, and it is a way to measure privacy, not an algorithm to protect privacy. So some people might be confused with when they hear the word differential privacy, they might think that it provides a method to protect privacy, but that is not the case. Differential privacy is a framework to quantitatively measure a privacy risk, and it does not give you an algorithm to protect privacy. It is up to you to come up with an algorithm to protect privacy, because differential privacy provides measure. So if you have an algorithm, you can measure how how protective of privacy your algorithm is. It's just like, just like accuracy or precision or recall. It's just a way to measure privacy. So suppose we have a scenario. So there's an analyst, and there are two data sets, data set number 1 and data set number 2. And those two data sets differ by only one person's record, which is John's data. So data set number 1 doesn't contain John's data. Data set number 2 does contain John's data. So that is the only difference between two data sets. And the analyst, for example, let's assume that there's a researcher or an analyst working on two data sets, and the analyst makes identical queries to both data sets. And then obviously there would be a returned responses from both data sets. I mean, yeah, from data set number 1 and from data set number 2. So result number 1 comes from data set number 1. Result number 2 comes from data set number 2. And suppose that a query could be anything. It could be any query. For example, like the maximum age of users in data set number 1, or average income of the users in data set number 1. Something. It could be anything, because that is the power of differential privacy. It's just it works for any analytic algorithm, analytic mechanism that works on the data set. So if the two data sets, if the two responses, result number 1, result number 2, are not the same, then that means John's data being added to data set number 1 made a significant difference, so that result number 2 is different from result number 1. So that means that the privacy is compromised, because we know that John's data, just one single person's record, made a difference, right? So this much is clear. So if result number 1 and result number 2 are significantly different, for example, a query could have been average income of all the users in the data set. And before adding John's data, the average income was $40,000. And then adding John's data, the average income was $60,000. Then it means that John's income was significantly large, so that it made a lot of difference in the two results. So that much that is how the privacy is compromised. If the two results were about the same, approximately within like a reasonable error margin, such as 5%, 95% confidence interval, something like that, then we know that privacy is protected. So that is the whole concept behind differential privacy. It is called differential privacy because of this two data sets. There's data set number 1, there's data set number 2, that differs by only one person's record, and the result should be about the same. So that is the whole setup. So in this case, when the result number 1 and result number 2 are approximately the same values, then the outcome, it means that the outcome is the same with or without John's data. So adding John's data to data number 1 didn't make a significant impact. So that is why, obviously that is why the two results are about the same. So that means that nothing bad will happen to me, whether I participate in this study, in this an analysis or not. So I am, I can feel safe about providing my data to the study, because there won't be any significant difference between giving my data and not giving my data, because the result will be about the same. So you can feel safe about that. So formally, what differential privacy is this equation. No, this inequation here. So an algorithm, a random algorithm M, or a random mechanism M, gives or provides epsilon differential privacy if for all pairs of datasets X and Y differing in one person's record. So X and Y just differs by one person's record, or one entry, one row. So for all such dataset X, Y, and for all events S, if this is guaranteed, then that means that this M provides epsilon differential privacy. So what does it mean here? So first of all, it's a probability. So it's a probability that some mechanism M working on the data set X has some output, and there's the same mechanism M working on the data set Y, which differs from X by one person's record, has the same output. And what is the probability that these two outputs are the same? So M working on X and M working on Y, what's the probability that the outputs will be the same? This is a probability. And there's a probability involved because M is a random algorithm. It's a mechanism or some kind of analysis machine that involves some randomness in the process. So that is why there's probability involved. So if the probability of the two are about the same, are differ, the probability between this and this differ by e to the epsilon, then it means that the M provides epsilon differential privacy. And here, epsilon is called a privacy budget or privacy loss. So this e to the epsilon is like the error margin or the bound of the difference between this term and this term. So, for example, if epsilon is really small, like if epsilon is 0, for example, then if epsilon is 0, then this term becomes 1. E to the power of 0 is 1, right? That means that this and this term, these two terms are the same. The probability of these two terms are the same, and which means that this mechanism M returns nothing useful because the probability is exactly the same. So the mechanism M working on X and Y, if the output is exactly the same, then what is the point of doing an analysis on the data set? Because we'll gain nothing useful. But the privacy, at least, the privacy is perfectly protected. So that's what epsilon means. So a smaller epsilon means higher privacy risk, and a larger epsilon means lower privacy risk or higher privacy protection. So yeah, you can rearrange the terms like this. So basically, it's a ratio. So it's a ratio between two probabilities, which can be bounded by this e to the epsilon, this term. And if epsilon is small enough, we can actually rewrite this as like this. So if epsilon is really small, then there's the e to the power exponential term can be interpreted or approximated by 1 plus epsilon. So you can, this is a bit more clear. Like if epsilon, if epsilon is really small, if epsilon is 0, then the ratio is the same. If epsilon is like 0.1, then it means that there's the ratio between the two is bounded by 1.1, something like this. Right. So far, so good. Note that this notion, this definition of differential privacy has to work for all kinds of data and all kinds of output. It doesn't work for just one. So if we say that the mechanism M provides epsilon differential privacy, then it means that it works for all kinds of X and Y and S. It doesn't work for just one particular data set or one particular output. It means that M guarantees epsilon differential privacy for any data set that differs by one record and for any potential output. So it's a very strong guarantee. Right, so what DP guarantees and what DP does not guarantee. So for example, let's say that there's a data set consists of patients' hospital records, or patients' health records, and there's an analyst or researcher making queries and getting answer, making another query, getting another answer, making another query, getting answer. Like just series of queries and learning some statistical stuff about the data set. And out comes a report, analysis report that says, after doing series of queries, we learned that the correlation between smoking and cancer is statistically meaningful. So there is a statistically meaningful relationship between smoking and cancer. So that is the study report. So what differentially private algorithm M prevents, what it prevents is that the analyst cannot find that you smoke. So that is guaranteed by DP algorithm. So if your mechanism M provides E epsilon differential privacy, then there's a E to the epsilon, there's like epsilon privacy budget or privacy loss. So which is a bound. So there's like an epsilon privacy or epsilon privacy loss guarantee that the analyst will not find out that you particularly smoke. So that is guaranteed. But what it doesn't guarantee is that, so for example, if insurance company, after learning this report, after reading this report, charges you, a smoker, a higher premium, then you are still harmed by this report. But that is something that cannot be avoided by differential privacy, because it's general knowledge. So study report that says there's a correlation between smoking and cancer, that knowledge would have been gained regardless of your inclusion in this database. So whether you provide your health data into database or not, same conclusion would have been drawn anyway, and the insurance company could still apply this rule to charge a higher premium for to you, a smoker. So that is something that cannot be avoided by differential privacy, because it's general knowledge, it's global knowledge. The only thing that can be avoided is local knowledge, which is finding out you smoke. So yeah, so we should draw a clear line. We should make a clear distinction between the two. Right, so there we should talk about some very useful properties of differential privacy, which makes differential privacy a very powerful tool. So once let's say that you release a data generated by a differentially private algorithm M. So for example, let's say that you are doing a series of queries on the database, and the mechanism that you're using for your query is differentially private. And then after doing series of queries, after doing a series of analysis, you release a final data, the result of the analysis. Let's say that you release a result of the analysis to the world, and in that case, what happens is, first of all, the release data set is future proof. So a certain level of epsilon level of privacy loss is preserved regardless of any future side information or post-processing. So if you release a data set that is generated by epsilon differentially private algorithm M, then that data set is still guaranteed epsilon differential privacy regardless of any future data set that could be released by some other companies. So for example, like in the Netflix Prize example, if the Netflix Prize dataset itself was epsilon differentially private, then linking the Netflix Prize dataset with the IMDb dataset would still provide epsilon differential privacy. So it is just future proof, and also, which means that it is also post-processing proof. So if you do some post-processing with the release data set, it still provides epsilon differential privacy. So whether you do machine learning on the data set or not. For example, if the data set release is already epsilon differential privacy, and then you learn a machine learning model on top of that, then that machine learning model will still be epsilon differential private. So that's how powerful DP differential privacy is. It provides also group privacy. So if mechanism M provides epsilon differential privacy for one person, then it provides K times epsilon differential privacy for a group of K people. So that is, you can simply just multiply the privacy loss by the size of the group, and then you can quantify a group privacy. For example, if a mechanism M provides epsilon differential privacy for you, then, and if your entire family of 5 is included in the data set, then the same mechanism M provides 5 times epsilon differential privacy for your entire family. There's also, this is a very powerful theorem of compositionality. So Differential privacy comes with compositional theorem, which is that you can bound cumulative privacy loss over multiple analyses, which means that, if your mechanism M provides epsilon differential privacy for a single query, like, doing a single study or single analysis or single query on a data set costs epsilon differential privacy loss, epsilon privacy loss, then when you do multiple analyses on the data set with the same mechanism M, then you can actually bound the total privacy loss over the multiple analyses. And in the worst case, what you can do is simply you can add epsilon by the number of each query. So if you do 5 queries, then it means that if you do 5 queries with the epsilon differential private algorithm M, then the total worst case loss is 5 times E. But that is the worst case. But still, this is a very powerful theorem. Because of this, you can actually kind of you can approximate how much total privacy loss how much total privacy loss cost there was for the entire series of analyses. So, which leads to programmability. So, you can actually use a lot of differential private algorithms and then compose a series of very large scale differential private analysis by breaking that down into several small scale differential private building blocks. So, and if each building block has a certain privacy loss or privacy budget, then you can simply combine all of them to estimate the total privacy loss because of the compositionality. So yeah, these 4 properties are very useful properties of differential privacy. And the powerful and the advantage or the power of deep differential privacy is that all these properties, future proof or post-processing proof, group privacy, compositionality, programmability, these properties above, these properties are held regardless of the specific implementation of the algorithm M. So if it doesn't really matter how you implement the algorithm M, as long as M is guaranteed to provide epsilon differential privacy, then all these properties come along with algorithm M. So it's a very general property. So let's take a look at what kind of algorithm M is epsilon differential private. So these so far, these were just all all concepts. These are all abstract excellent description of the algorithm M. So we can actually take a look at some concrete example of M. So our setup is counting rows in a database. So simply it's just row counting. And let's say that in this specific example, we're counting the number of users for each credit rating. So let's say we have a database which consists of user and their corresponding credit rating. And so there could be many users, and there can be only 3 types of ratings, which are bad, normal, and good. So for example, Gandalf has a bad rating, Frodo has a good credit rating, Gimli has normal credit rating, so on and so forth. And we're counting the number of users for each credit rating type. So we can make, so for example, let's say hypothetically you reach at this destination. So for credit, so there are 3 people who have bad credit ratings. There are 1,510 users who have normal credit rating, and then 200 people who have a good credit rating. So this is the setup. And for example, let's assume that we remove Gandalf, who has a bad credit rating, from the database. So this is the difference between this data set and this data set is by 1 user. So it's this is the setup that we talked about in the differential privacy with the X and Y differing by only 1 person. So this and this, and you can removing from here to here, removing Gandalf's Gandalf's data set from the data set leads to a difference in the final data. So before it was bad, before there were 3 people who had bad credit rating, but now there is there are 2 people who have a bad credit rating. So we know by removing Gandalf, we know that Gandalf had a bad credit rating. So before we didn't know. There was no way we could find out Gandalf had a bad rating, but by removing Gandalf from the data set. So I mean, simply by looking at this aggregate data, there's no way we can tell that Gandalf had a bad rating. But by removing and then seeing the different outcome, then we know that Gandalf had a bad rating. So that is here. Privacy is leak, basically. So, but the question still remains. So how can we target Gandalf specifically? For example, we don't know that if Gandalf is in the dataset or not, and even if so, we don't know how to target Gandalf so that we can remove Gandalf from the dataset and then reach this destination. How can we do that? So, but there's not just actually. So trying to target Gandalf is actually not a really hard, not a difficult task. You can actually easily do it with some side information such as age. So if we know that Gandalf is over 300 years of age, then we can use that information to try to make a specific set of queries that is targeted for Gandalf. So for example, like removing or excluding or including Gandalf in the query. For example, let's say that you're making a query like this. So select count rating from the table where let's assume that there's like another column here, which is age column, where user age is greater or equal than 300. And we can make another query that says select count rating from table where user age is less than 300. So in the data set, there wouldn't be too many people who are of the age who have a age higher than 300, right? Only like very small number of people, like Saruman, Gandalf, and Arwen, some elf people. They would so they would survive this, and they wouldn't survive this. So this would be targeted for. So if you make this query, then Gandalf would definitely be a victim here. And if you mix in a bit more additional information, such as a user has beard or something, or user has a staff as a weapon, or user has user I don't know user is a magician, like a wizard or something. So when you start combining additional side information, you can pretty much accurately target the individual that you are interested in. So this kind of even though we cannot access the user directly, like the name of the user directly, you can still somehow narrow down the scope of your query by using side information. So this kind of here, the comparison between this and this can still happen with, even if you mask out specific usernames for the analyst. So in this example, in this case, in this scenario, in this setup, what algorithm M can we use to guarantee epsilon differential privacy? So what can we do to prevent this kind of thing from happening? So we can use something called the Laplace mechanism. So Laplace mechanism it's not something too difficult. The basic idea is to add random noise to the retrieved answers. So that is it. So in this specific mechanism called the Laplace mechanism, we are drawing random noise from Laplace distribution with mu0 and standard deviation of 2. So this is a specific example that I'm just using in this specific example here in this scenario. It doesn't have to be standard deviation 2. Actually, there's a rule for coming up with the standard deviation value. So, but in this example, we're using mu0 and standard deviation of 2. And Laplace distribution looks like this. So it looks like an exponential distribution in both directions. It's like a symmetric exponential distribution. And the higher the standard deviation, obviously, the higher you would get larger noise. So here it's the red line. The red line is when the mu is 0 and b is a scale. So it's not exactly the same as standard deviation. So B is standard deviation. I think the standard deviation was square root of 2 times the scale squared. So B scale, so B to the power of 2. So let's rephrase. So 2 times B squared is the same as variance. So that's the relationship between standard deviation and the scale B. So, oh, actually here it is, here, right here. Right, so we are drawing a noise from Laplace distribution and simply adding the noise to the retrieved answer to retrieve them. So the answer being, how many people have bad credit ratings? So before, the answer was exactly 3, but now we're, instead of saying 3, we're adding noise to the answer 3, so random noise, and it is bidirectional. It could be positive noise, it could be a negative noise. So in the first query, the returned response was 2.915. In the second query, it was 1.882, 1.292, 4.026, 5.346. So so by looking at a single query, it is noisy now. So we can't, so the analyst cannot tell the exact number, exact value, or exact number of people who have bad credit ratings. You can just, the analyst can simply estimate it could be around this value. So the average, but the problem is that the average is still 3. So making multiple queries will give you a pretty good estimate. So the answers are now noisy. So inclusion or exclusion of Gandalf won't matter much, because simply adding Gandalf or removing Gandalf in the data set would have very small, would have little impact to the outcome, because the outcome is still perturbed by a certain level of noise. But with large enough number of queries, we can still accurately estimate the true value. So again, already with 5 queries, we could get the average of 3. But still, but with only 5 queries, the confidence interval was pretty large. So it's not a very accurate estimation. But you can imagine if we make the same queries like 100 times or 1,000 times or million times, then the confidence interval would be really, really narrow. So we can very accurately estimate the true value, which would be 3. So there's something called fundamental law of information recovery, which is to say that too many accurate answers to too many queries would surely lead to privacy risk or re-identification. So even if your questions are not directly privacy, doesn't directly lead to privacy risk. If you make the query large enough times, then it can still lead to a potential privacy risk. Okay, so this is the whole Laplace mechanism. So the question now remains how to set the standard deviation. So if we set the standard deviation higher than like 10, then it would surely give you a very strong privacy protection, because there would be a lot, the answer would be masked by masked due to a large large magnitude noise. So, but the problem is then there's zero utility in doing the analysis, because the true value would be masked by sheer strength of the noise. So there's nothing you can gain. There's no insight to be gained from the analysis. So there's a trade-off between utility and privacy. So you want to set a standard deviation to a value that strikes a really good balance between the two. So what Laplace mechanism says is that if you set the scale being the B here the B, if you set the scale to S over the epsilon being your privacy budget or privacy loss, if you set the scale to S over epsilon, where S is the sensitivity of the querying function F, then if you set the scale to this for your Laplace mechanism here, Laplace distribution, then this Laplace mechanism which is to add random noise drawn from Laplace distribution with the scale this, then that mechanism guarantees epsilon differential privacy. So that means that, so if you set your scale to this and simply add noise, that is just add noise to the answer, the noise which is drawn from the Laplace distribution with scale this, then the whole process is guaranteed to have epsilon differential privacy. This epsilon differential privacy. So before we go, so what is the sensitivity of the Coring function f? So what does S mean? So sensitivity of the Coring function f. So sensitivity is the largest difference that could be made by your Coring function f. So in this example, f is a counting function, so the sensitivity is 1, because a largest difference that can be made by a single example is 1, whether just like here. When Gandalf is in, bad was 3. When Gandalf was out, bad is 2. So a single example being in the data set or not, this difference leads to an outcome difference of 1. So that is the sensitivity. So there's a formal definition of sensitivity, which is actually I should have put that in, but I'm sorry, but yeah, you get. Actually, let me just quickly show you guys what the formal definition is. Right here. Okay, it is here. Yep. Okay. So here is the formal definition of sensitivity. So sensitivity of function denoted delta f is defined by this. So and here the x and y is all pairs of them differing in. So x and y in D differing in at most one element. So it's exactly our setup. So the sensitivity is the maximum difference between the two. But that could be incurred. That could be caused by the function f. So in our counting example, the maximum difference can be incurred by x and y, which differs by one data set, is just 1. But if, for example, if we round up our counting output by, I don't know, 5, so for example, rounding up to to 5, so that a count value of 9 is rounded up to 10, but the count value of 11 is rounded up to 15. So in that case, the maximum difference that can be made by one record difference is 5. So in that case, sensitivity 5. But here we're not doing any rounding up. We're just giving the count as they are. So the sensitivity is 1. So I hope that much is clear. So right. So in this example, f is a counting function. F is counting function, so the sensitivity is 1. So the scale is now 1 over epsilon. And in our example, standard deviation was set to 2, right? Standard deviation was set to 2. So the definition between the bias, definition between the scale, the b, and the standard deviation was this. So standard deviation equals square root of 2 times the scale squared. And the standard deviation in our example was 2. So if you do some algebra here, then you can estimate then the epsilon value was 0.707. So which means that by drawing noise from a Laplace distribution with with the mean equals to 0 and standard deviation equals to 2, that guarantees 0.707 differential privacy. So which is pretty, so in this case, so the epsilon being 0.7 is a pretty small value. Which means that your algorithm, your mechanism M, is bounded by e to the 0.7, e to the power of 0.7 margin. So when working on the data set x and y, which differs by just one individual. So how small? I mean, still, it doesn't really. It's kind of hard to grasp how small like epsilon 0.7 is. So in reference, Apple uses epsilon value of 2 for their iOS keyboard autocorrect. So when you type something in the keyboard, they suggest they do autocorrect for you, like, and to come up with this algorithm, they used epsilon value of 2 for differential privacy. So e to the 2, so epsilon of 2, it means that the margin, the bound between the ratio of the two probabilities is e to the power of 2, which means that which is pretty high, which is about 8 or something. So yeah, I for example, personally, I don't really. It's really hard to make a intuitive understanding of what the epsilon value of 2 means, or what the epsilon value of something, any epsilon value means. Maybe if one of you guys in the one of the attendees have a pretty good idea, but for me, this is all theoretical and all mathematical and all good, but still, like what is the, like, how should I feel about Apple using epsilon value of 2? Does it mean that my privacy is risked or not? It's really hard to tell. Anyway, so Laplace mechanism is just one example. There are a lot of different mechanisms for different occasions. So each application, for each querying function f, you should come up, there's a specific differential private algorithm. So for a counting algorithm, there's Laplace mechanism. For counting and histogram queries, there's something called pink. Queries with joins, there's elastic sensitivity, yada, yada, yada. So there's all different kinds of differential privacy algorithm for each occasion. Right, so moving on to differential privacy in machine learning. So far, any questions so far? Nope. Okay, that's fine. For me, when I first tried to understand differential privacy, it was a bit unintuitive because of all the because it's all math and all probability. So it didn't really come to me as intuitive, but maybe it's okay for you guys then. All right, so moving on to differential privacy and machine learning. So far it was all good. So we were talking about data analysis and how like making queries to data set can potentially cause privacy issues. But what's differential privacy got to do with machine learning? So what is the whole point of introducing differential privacy in machine learning scene? So it is relevant because a model's weights in machine learning contain information from the training set. Obviously, the model's weight is a derived data set, derived information from the training sample. So we can ask a question such as, when there's a data set, when there are two data sets, D and D prime, which differs by only one record, one sample, one training sample, which could be your sample, then does stochastic gradient descent provide epsilon differential privacy model weights? So stochastic gradient descent is the algorithm that derives derived data from D and D prime, and the derived data being the model weights, the model parameters. So can we say that the stochastic gradient descent provides epsilon differential privacy? And the answer is no. So that is why we need differential privacy in machine learning. So that is there's something called deep learning with differential privacy, which was published in 2016, so which is already 5 years ago, which is a very seminal paper in this deep differential privacy domain. So the motivation or the concept between differentially private SGD. So with DP-SGD is the differentially private version of SGD. So using this DP-SGD, when you train a machine learning model with DP-SGD, then your model weights are epsilon differentially private. So that is what DP-SGD is made for. So the notion or the setup behind DP-SGD is that the SGD accessing a gradient information is seen as a querying. So making queries to the data set is the same as SGD algorithm accessing the gradient information of the sample, because a gradient information contains something about the sample. If the gradient is large, that means that the sample has a higher impact to the loss. And if the gradient is small, then that sample has a small impact to minimizing the loss. So gradient information is directly related to the privacy of a single sample. So when you are updating your model parameters by accessing the gradient information, that is where potentially privacy can be leaked. So SGD accessing gradient information is the same as single sample's loss gradient with respect to each parameter. And if this gradient access, so gradient access, meaning that SGD algorithm using a gradient of a single sample, if this gradient access is differentially private, so are the resulting model weights because of the future proof theorem. The properties, there were 4 properties of DP, right? There was future proof, there was group privacy, there was compositionality, and among all those properties, because of the future proof property, if gradient access, if accessing gradient, which is querying, if this querying process is differentially private, then so are all the resulting data, resulting values from this querying, from this process is also epsilon differentially private, because it is protected from any post-processing. I mean, updating your model parameter can be seen as a post-processing. But first you calculate the gradient, and then you average the gradient from all the samples, and then you multiply that by a learning rate, and then you simply take you minus that from the current model weight. So that is what SGD does. So that is the post-processing step. So yeah, so that is why DP-SGD decides to add noise to the gradient, because if we add noise to the gradient, then it means that accessing the gradient is made differentially private, and so are all the following processes. The model weights and all that are also differentially private. So simply adding noise to the gradient is the whole idea behind DP-SGD. But then you need to carefully design how to add noise to actually guarantee epsilon differential privacy. So that is the whole point of the paper. So yeah, what kind of noise and how much noise, that is the point. So in this paper, they use something called Gaussian mechanism, which is very similar to Laplace mechanism. So in Gaussian mechanism, you simply draw noise from Gaussian distribution with where the mu and standard deviation, where mu is 0, obviously, but where standard deviation is calibrated very carefully. So it is calibrated to guarantee differential privacy. So in DPGAN, the standard deviation of Gaussian mechanism is determined by 2 factors, one of which is noise scale. Noise scale is simply just the variance of the noise. So just the sigma that you're all familiar with. So noise is determined by noise scale, and also the bound of the gradient norm. So as I said, gradient with large norm is the sample at most risk of exposure. So as I said, if a sample provides large gradient norm, then it means that that sample has a very sensitive information to minimizing the loss. So the norm of the gradient is something that we can use as a as a measure to decide the risk of privacy. And so they use, both, as I said, both factors, noise scale and bound of the gradient norm is required to determine the SCD. But potentially gradients are all unbounded. Gradient could be negative infinity or positive infinity in theory. So in order to provide the bound of the gradient norm, DP-SGD just simply clips the gradients. Simply clips the norm of the gradient at each iteration, each gradient update step. And how much and the normal gradient that you want to clip by is just hyperparameter. You can use whichever value. You could use 2 or 3 or 5 or 10, whatever. So this is the whole algorithm, DP-SGD. So here you have a set of example. You have the loss function, which is just, it could be cross entropy, it could be mean squared error, it could be anything. And the parameters are learning rate eta and noise scale sigma and group size L gradient norm bound C. So gradient norm bound is the C is used for clipping the gradients, and group size L is, you can think of them as a batch size, but it is not exactly batch size. It is a unit of group that is required for DP-SGD, but we won't get into detail. It's just sufficiently large group size L. And you take random sample with probability L divided by N. N is the number of total samples. So take a random sample L. Take a random sample L teeth random sample. The whole iteration it consists of capital letter T number of parameter updates. So at the small teeth time step, you are sampling. You're getting like you're sampling a batch size of L, and then you're computing the gradients, and then you clip the gradients here, and then you add the noise where the noise is drawn from a Gaussian distribution of 0, mu equals 0, and standard deviation equals sigma squared C squared identity matrix. So C squared be coming from the gradient norm C, and then so the noise is added, and then you simply just take the gradient step, and that's it. And then you repeat this process for large T number of times. So in this algorithm, if sigma here is set as this value here, so there's the epsilon is the privacy budget, and delta is actually something called so this concept delta comes from something called epsilon delta differentially private. So so far we only talked about epsilon differential privacy, but there's an extended notion called epsilon delta differential privacy, which looks like this. So simply there's just delta chance of leaking privacy no matter what. It's just like an accident. So without delta, so your privacy is bounded by e to the epsilon, but with delta, there's an additional source of privacy leak, which could be accidental. So like for example, if delta is like 0.01, then there's like 1% chance your data is leaked, your privacy is compromised, something like that. Basically, it's not exactly that, but it is somewhere along the line. So delta is like an accidental probability of accidental privacy leak. So if you set your scale here equal to this value, so epsilon could be something like 0.5 or 0.2, but epsilon has to be lower than 1. That is a whole. That is like the constraint of DP-SGD. So epsilon has to be lower than 1. So epsilon being like 0.5 and delta being like 0.00 something. If you set your scale to this particular value, then your DP-SGD for a single gradient update for a single step is epsilon delta differentially private. So yeah, that is how you determine the value here. Right. So that is the whole differential private DP-SGD algorithm, and so as I said, DP-SGD guarantees epsilon delta differential privacy for each gradient update, for each iteration T, for each step T, but you still need to compute the entire privacy loss over the large capital T number of steps. So if you run DP-SGD algorithm for like 1,000 updates or 10,000 updates for 1 million updates, what is the total privacy loss? So you can calculate this based on the compositionality theorem. So each query costs privacy loss E in the. So as I said, that in the worst case, if your algorithm M has privacy loss epsilon, and you run your query, I don't know, n times, then in the worst case, your total privacy loss is n times epsilon. So in this case, so that is what strong composition is. So as you run epochs, as you run, as you run your gradient updates, the epsilon, the total privacy loss, increases by this much if you simply use if you simply just add this epsilon again and again for each update. If you simply add each privacy loss for each update, and if you simply add them all up, then you will get this privacy risk, privacy loss curve. But in DP-SGD paper, the authors actually came up with a very smart framework called moments accountant, which gives you a tighter bound, which gives you a tighter privacy loss accumulation computation. So if you use moments accountant proposed by the authors, your total privacy loss increases by this curve here. So which has a much tighter bound compared to a strong compositionality, which is just simply adding things up. So yeah, if it is almost there's like it's like a logarithmic curve here. So DP-SGD guarantees, for example, like when you use this value, like Q, when you use Q equals 0.01, sigma equals to 4, delta equals to 10 to the negative 5, then in that case, your privacy loss increases by only this much, even if you do 400 epoch updates. So here, Q, you can think of Q as just simply each epoch consists of 1 over Q batches. So in this case, it would be 100 each epoch consists of 100 mini batches, basically. So in this case, you can exactly calculate total privacy loss, which is much tighter than just saying, oh, when you do 400 epoch days, your worst case epsilon, your worst case total privacy loss is about 23, which is really irresponsible. But using their moments accountant mechanism, you can say that, oh, this DP-SGD guarantees total loss of 5 for 400 epochs, which is a much nicer bound. So yeah, this is the whole idea behind DP-SGD. So when you use DP-SGD with a very carefully tuned hyperparameters, you can guarantee a certain level of epsilon delta privacy, and epsilon delta differential privacy. Okay, so before we move on to federated learning, any questions so far with differential privacy? Nope. Okay, so I guess the description was clear enough. So the reason that we talked about differential privacy is we started with medGAN and then some privacy attack scenarios, and then we talked about differential privacy. So obviously you can make GAN differentially private, actually. So simply you can just use DP-SGD when training your GAN to make your GAN differentially private, because whatever you do. So DP-SGD is a very nice framework. It is just a black box optimization machine that guarantees epsilon delta differential privacy for any model, any machine learning models derived from the DP-SGD. So if you use DP-SGD to train your medGAN, then your medGAN would have been differentially private, but in case it was not. So you can use whatever you want to do with, as long as you use DP-SGD to train your GAN, whatever that is generated by your GAN is still differentially private. So that is how differential privacy is, how much powerful differential privacy is. And there's even more advanced GANs that guarantees differential privacy, such as like PATE GAN, PATE GAN. So you can look that up here if you're interested in more advanced methods. And maybe I should talk about some of the interesting notions about differential privacy before moving on to federated learning. We can talk about federated learning this Thursday. It's only it's only like 15 pages or something. So one thing that would be interesting to do future research on is a relationship between membership inference and differential privacy. So the reason that I said that differential privacy is a bit unintuitive to me is because I don't see a clear connection between the privacy budget epsilon and the membership inference attack outcome. So so membership inference attack is a very concrete scenario where you assume that the perpetrator, the hacker, had a full access to some number of users, and then that the hacker is using that knowledge to see if your GAN your machine learning model was trained with the data set that included some of the users that the attacker already knew. So that was a concrete setup. And in order to prevent that from happening, what epsilon value, what privacy budget should we use to prevent that from happening? So that is not exactly, I don't see a clear relationship between the two. And so for example, let's say that you use epsilon value of 0.1. No, let's say that you use epsilon value of 1, then it means that your mechanism M is bounded by the ratio. The ratio is bounded by e to the power of 1, which is 2.7. What is the value of natural logarithm? I mean natural exponent, which is so natural constant is 2.7182 whatever. So let's just say it is 2.7. So the ratio. So when you set your epsilon privacy budget to 1, then it means that the ratio between mx belonging to s and my belonging to y, and my belonging to s, the ratio between the two probabilities is bounded by 2.7, and I'm not really sure what to make of that. How to draw a line between that and the membership inference attack. And it is even harder to draw a line between the epsilon privacy budget to the attribute disclosure scenario. So if you want to prevent the attribute disclosure from happening to some extent, then what kind of epsilon privacy budget should you use? So that is also an interesting question that I don't have an answer yet. So maybe that could be an interesting future research scenario, like coming up with a lot of different potential privacy attack scenarios and how to draw a line between the attack scenarios with a differential privacy, and what kind of specific differential privacy budget you should use to prevent those kind of attacks. So that could be an interesting research scenario. Okay, I guess if there are no more questions, we can end the class today and then return to federated learning and the project number 3 specs on this Thursday. All right, I'll see you guys this Thursday. Bye-bye.